It's a lot easier to trust people than not to trust them. I trusted people completely, and it worked out for me. I mean, a lot of people it doesn't work out for. People will cheat you and so forth and so on. But I find that's the best thing you could do is to have someone, do something wrong because they think you're too innocent or too naive, and then you catch them, and then that's a person you can't trust. By the way, each person leads in a different way, as you know. But I think leaders can be made.
Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made, they are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people. In just a moment, I'll be joined by Ed Hajim, a Wall Street veteran with over 50 years of experience who rose from an orphanage and made it all the way to the boardroom. Ed was the chairman of the University of Rochester board, where he made the single largest donation of $30 million in the school history. Coming up, I'm going to be asking Ed how to stop being denied by your past, why gratitude and trust are the most powerful leadership tools out there, and what question he still uses after all these years to help push himself forward. So I've heard you say that the most important question any young person or leader should be asking themselves is, who are you? Why is that such an important question?
You see, basically, people don't truly understand that, at least for the first 15 or 18 years of their life, they have no control over who they are. You're a combination of your genes. You have no control over that. And your environment, your father, your mother, where you live, who you go to school. But no, you don't control that. Someplace in your late teens, and sometimes or it gets to the early 20s, you wake up and say, this is who I am. Here are the good parts of me. Here's the not so good parts. And in many respects, when you start that life, you say, maybe these are the parts I want to add. So I want people to start to ask, who am I? And recognize that I'm a combination of mom and dad and maybe Uncle Harry and Aunt Matilda, and that's affecting me. Am I talk too fast? Do I get too excited? Have a certain amount of anger? I'll give you be very personal. I grew up in orphanages and foster homes, and I asked myself during those 18 years, why me? So that developed a certain amount of anger, which I had to recognize, when I was in my early 20s, I started saying, kind of an angry young man, what's going on? And it was because of this. So I want young people to understand that. And when they start to understand that, then they can get at the real problem and try to decide what their passions are, what their really interests are, what part of society do they want to make a contribution to, and where are they going to be the happiest and so forth. But the first thing you have to do as a young person is find out who you are and why you're that way. And then again, as I say, the real job in college, that late after the teens is to figure out what parts of you want to keep, maybe improve, and what part you'd like to get rid of, and then part you want to add. And I think those are the sort of my process. And that's my crusade today, is to have young people formally do that. We did it. We did it in the dining rooms. We did it in the dormitories. We did it in the fraternity houses. But we never sat down and wrote it down or communicated between two people. In the little course I've developed, the first step is that everybody tells their story. So you find out you're not alone. You also find out what other people have found out about themselves. You may be able to use about finding out yourself. And here I've done it again. My daughter worked for TED Talks. I answer the question too long. So, Damon, you got to cut me off.
No, I'm not going to cut you off. I could listen to you all day long. And I don't want to just breeze over your background, because that's incredible. But what you're saying is part of who you are is your genes, and then you can develop from there. So one of the things I always say, and I want to see if you agree or disagree, is that great leaders aren't born or made. They're always in the making. Do you think that you're a born leader, or can you develop into a leader?
You can develop into a leader. It is a lifelong process, but you start with certain kinds of characteristics. And, I will tell you, I found early, I didn't know this, but when I was a junior in college, I was an engineer, which was, unbelievably difficult at that point in time. And I decided to create a humor magazine. And I truly
a humor magazine,
like the thing they have at Harvard, the
Lampoons or whatever.
Lampoon, exactly. It was my copy. Because I was an engineer, and Rochester at that point in time was a place where fun went to die. And I was going to create this humor magazine where people are going to laugh a little bit. And the president hated it, and the provost hated it, and the librarian said it shouldn't be done, and I did it. So here I came across a passion where I really love putting people together to solve a problem or create a product. I understood that at the point in time. I was searching for, who I was. And I said, this is what I like to do. And people like me to do it. Later on, I found out that my real secret and passion was to help people do better than they thought they could. And that was my leadership principle. It got fed back to me in my late 30s in one of my jobs. A young guy came in and said, "Boy, Mr. Hajim, you really want me to do well, don't you?" And all of a sudden the lights went on. And I said, "Yeah, I do." And that's what people felt about my leadership. By the way, each person leads in a different way, as you know. But I think leaders can be made. Now, some people don't want to be leaders. Let me just tell you where in my lifetime I realized people that didn't want to be leaders. In my sophomore year, I decided to be a physicist. So I took the advanced physics course rather than the engineering physics course. And I looked around at these people and I said, well, first of all, these aren't my people. And, they weren't. They were much more serious about what we were doing. Yeah. They seemed to be a lot of intellectually more capable. Maybe they weren't. Maybe I just weren't spending the time. But they weren't that interested in people as physicists. By definition, if you're that interested in people, you're not really a good physicist because you're spending time on, the characteristics of things, the science and so forth, but much more important to you. So if you're going to be a leader, one of the things is you got to figure out where you're really interested in people. And you don't have to be very interested in people. You just have to make sure that you understand that one of your jobs is having people do well who work for you. There's a word called perspicacity, which I made up the definition of. It's a different word.
I was going to say, because I can't spell that.
Sounds good to me. It's basically the ability to bring about an intended effect. Now, anything you want to do, if you can bring that about in some method, then you can become a leader. Also, leaders are very time sensitive, context sensitive, even geographically sensitive. The leaders in California are different than leaders on Wall Street. Leaders in
But you could be a leader without leading anybody, right? You can be a parent. You can be a self. Leadership starts with self leadership. I believe.
I think that's good. Yes, you're right. Well, that's why I say the first step is to find who you are, and when you can find yourself, you have to lead yourself in these directions. You're right. You just taught me something, so I can use that. That's true. No, that's really important that you understand, your own characteristics. But there are characteristics of leaders. People have to want to be part of a group. If you really love being an architect, you want to sit and draw all day long, or you want to study or go to a laboratory, you can't lead that way because you got to be more interested in what's going on between organization, between people. And, and by the way, leaders have limits. I was pretty good I was magnificent at 20, magnificent at 100 people, pretty damn good at 500. We got to 800, and I started to realize what I was doing all day long didn't interest me anymore. And, when I was at Rochester, I had 30,000 people, and I could see where, if you ran a big company, I worked with Xerox once, and David Kearns, so what do you do all day long? And I realized I didn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to. So each leader has some people are good at, you do this or you teach this probably. You get to a certain point and your leadership interest, not your capability, your interest. If you don't change that next step, as to the change in what you do every day, you will fail, and that's very important. So
no, I agree with you. I mean, you take for instance somebody, and I see this all the time, who's a great salesperson. They're a great salesperson. I had a guy call me up. He's like, "Oh, I'm so excited! I'm getting promoted into leadership." I'm like, "Don't do it. That's not you. I know your behavior, what you're doing."
Exactly.
This guy did it, Ed. 2 years, he was miserable. This is a story top of mind for me because he just called me and he said that he finally got an opportunity to go back to being just an individual contributor. And you got to figure out where your strengths are, like you said, what your passions are, and where you want to spend your time. But I want to go back. I don't want to just brush over it because I think this is very, very important for our audience. Let's touch on your childhood more because you got an incredible story there.
I must say I had trouble. When I was 18 years old, I buried my background. And so I didn't bring it out in the open until I was in my 70s. My daughter, my wife, my kids, and the University of Rochester pushed me to tell my story. And I finally wrote the story, and then I was going to give it to a few friends. And they said, no, this has got to be told. I could go way back to my great-grandfather got murdered in the desert in Saudi Arabia or someplace. But basically, my father came as an immigrant, became fascinated with the technology at the time, which was radio, became very wealthy. In 29, lost everything, started to drive across. He said, all I had left was my car and a box of cigars, and I decided either I was going to commit suicide or I was going to drive across country because In those days, supposedly California, the streets were paved with gold. He gets in his car, drives across country, stops in St. Louis at his cousin's house. He's totally unwelcome, falls in love with the next to the youngest daughter. In those days, they got married and went on to California. Streets weren't paved with gold. He was a very difficult character, having demons, lost all his money and so forth. And 3 years later, I was born to an unemployed father, right on my birth certificate, and a homemaker mother. Another 3 years went by. The old lady said, the young lady, she was only 24 years old. He was 15 years her senior, said, I can't handle this anymore. Divorced him and got custody of me and moved me back to St. Louis from Los Angeles. And he got visiting rights and $5 a week of alimony and child support. And visiting was on Sunday. So one Sunday, a month or so later, he got in his car and drove across country 3 days, picked me up. And instead of taking me to the park or the movie, he got back on Highway 66, which is the front of my book. And we went back to California. He told my mother never to look for us. And he told me she died. And if you want to find out what happened, then you have to read the book. I'm not telling you about that.
And that's your first book, The Road Less Traveled.
My first book, On the Road Less Traveled. Anyway, Dad had shifted from radio technology to a radio operator aboard a ship. And during 2 years or so, he went to sea regularly, and I didn't have any family, neighbors, or friends. And when World War II broke out, he supposedly got drafted. I was surprised that he volunteered, got an officer in the Merchant Marines, and I was put into the Catholic welfare system. Over the next 5 years, I spent in 5 different Catholic foster homes, which moved from really cold and abusive. The first one was terrible, to warm and caring, which was the last one. Unfortunately, the last one was only 6 months. After the war, we ended up in New York City. He ended up on the East Coast as an officer. They put him out of the service. We spent the summer in the YMCA at 34th Street. Not too many Harvard graduates there. And then on to Coney Island for a year, where I did well at the local public school. He did very poorly. And couldn't find any land-based work, so we went back to sea. And actually, it was one of the great stories. In the summer of 47, I was supposed to go to some lady's house, a friend or neighbor's lady's house in the middle of the summer. And he had a job on a ship, and all of a sudden she changed her mind and he had to go. And so he told the head of the clerk at the hotel and the local delicatessen to feed me. And I spent a period of time by myself in this hotel room at age 11.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I used to go to giant baseball games because for a nickel, you could go from Coney Island to the Polo Grounds. And, and I'll tell you a better story than that. It cost like 50 cents to get into the bleachers, but it was the guy, if you walked around there, he'd get you in for a quarter underneath some other place, and you go find yourself a seat. I was a crazy baseball fan. I knew the size of Whitey Lockman's socks. Anyway, so Dad left me. He called from, she was supposed to take me in September. She changed her mind again, and he got me into an orphanage in Far Rockaway. And, it was awful because I traded my room in a hotel for this room with 50 other guys, and my private bathroom to a room with, 10 faucets and 10 sinks and so forth. But the first time in my life, I had consistency in a community, and they were all enrolled in a wonderful public grammar school, and I did very well. And things went along well for a couple of years. And then I aged out of that particular orphanage, and my father, again, disappeared this time. He abandoned me for the 4th time in our 15-year relationship. And he's not a bad guy. I mean, I had to fire my second ghostwriter because she wanted me to hate my father. I loved him, and I understood his problem. Anyway, he abandoned me.
Let me stop right there for 1 second, because I heard that before, but that's true. How were you able to do that? I think that's wonderful that you were able to put that aside and understand that your father just had issues, right? And you loved him because maybe he thought he was doing as best he could.
That's it. He was doing the best he could. He did what he could do. The only work that he could get was on a ship as a radio operator, which took him out 8-9 months on a ship to various places. In the war, he was out for the whole 5-year period in various ships and so forth. That was his job. And by the way, I had nobody else. I mean, if I gave him up, what would I have? So, and also but he wrote me letters, and he did the one thing that I tell every people is the most important thing with relationship is he gave me unconditional love. He didn't do anything to do that, but in the letters, I was always the greatest. You'll find out in my book, I wrote a letter to him when I was 10 years old, say, Dad, I'm really not that good a kid. Because he used to say, I could do no wrong, ever. Somebody else was always wrong. So he gave me unconditional love, and he said to me, you're going to be great someday. He kept telling me that. And here I was an orphan in an orphanage, and so forth. And but I got this one social worker lady at the first orphanage found a second orphanage for me in Yonkers, New York, which was 4 blocks from a fine high school. And that high school, 80% of the kids went to something called a private college. And that gave me an epiphany. And I said, oh boy, that's what I want to do. And so I put my head down and I was a varsity athlete. Baseball was I can tell you baseball stories, but I had 300 when I was a senior.
That's not bad.
323, in fact.
Yeah. Okay.
Played basketball. I played varsity, but I never played much because all the guys were huge and I was small. But I got a scholarship. I got the NRTC scholarship. There's only 3 or 4 scholarships you could apply to, and somehow I got that. And I got a wonderful story for that because when I went for the physical, you're supposed to weigh 125 pounds, and I weighed 122 pounds. And so I ate 3 pounds of bananas that morning, and it didn't work. And Corman said to me, 123 pounds, you're out of here. I said, wait a second. I can't. I have no money, and I really have to go to school. And so the guy said, 125, move on.
I love it. So
you go through these lives, you have great stories to tell because they all happened. And at high school, I worked. I was a bag boy and a pin setter, and I worked as a soda jerk and actually ran a candy store for a while in Yonkers, New York. So it was but people say to me, "Oh, isn't it awful?" No. Right now, and I communicate to people at Horatio Alger, or I'm going to see the Foster Angels in Texas. I tell these kids, if you get to a certain stage, like 17, 18 years old, you have capabilities that your peers don't have. You have taken those disadvantages you had, and they've turned into advantages. You have adaptability. I mean, after the second schoolyard at a Catholic school, you learn adaptability pretty quickly, or else you're in trouble. And then you have resilience, you have perseverance, and you have a little guy on your shoulder saying, "Hey, you can do that." And so I find that these disadvantages become advantages. There are some disadvantages, like being angry and so forth, but these disadvantages become advantages over time. They really do. If you go through difficulties, because you overcome them, you don't have anxieties. And also, life seems to get better as you go through it. As I said, I traded my room with 50 guys to a room with 4 guys. At college, my first year of college was terrible, but I only had 1 roommate. The food was better. So, this sort of experience is, you appreciate things. And of course, I right now, my biggest principle is gratitude. I just feel so grateful. That's the background. It does read, sort of like fiction because, I lived in about 18 or so places in my first 18 years, and and 5 foster homes and 2 orphanages. That's
was it your dad writing these letters saying that you're great, or what was it that kept you on the straight and narrow and not veering off into crime or having a victim mentality that would take you down a completely different route?
You ask the most important question, which I would love to communicate to people. Let me give you 3 sort of answers I've come up with. One, in these foster homes, I went to Catholic schools. They were run by the nuns. The nuns made it very clear, if you did the right thing, you end up in the right place. If you did the wrong thing, you end up in the other place. So they made it very clear. I mean, and then the other place was not so good. And it's 7 or 8, 9-year-old, you believe that stuff, and it's in my DNA now. That was the one thing. The second was my father, who kept saying, you're going to be better than you're much better than what it looks like now. You're the greatest. You're a great kid. You're a good kid, and so forth. The third thing was, in those days on Saturday, it was a ritual. We went to the movies, and in those days you had heroes. They were, They usually smoked a cigarette at the end, but all the way through it, John Wayne or Clark Gable or these cowboy movies, these people always succeeded. They always got the best looking woman. They always lived a great life and so forth. So those were really role models. And you sort of said, that's a possibility. And it's kind of corny but that's what we did every Saturday. And so that those 3 things seemed to form a structure for me. And I sort of said, that's what I want. And I want to be better than I am now. And then, having this idea of a college, I was surrounded at this particular high school with kids that all went to private colleges. I said, and once you go to college and you adjust to that system, then you're on your way. You can see the golden ring, I think, people do veer off into bad directions. I guess I'm just lucky in many respects. I had a couple of, mentors didn't because I didn't trust anybody, But I did have a fabulous mentor, fabulous fellow who ran the second orphanage, and he believed in me, even though he kept saying, you don't pay attention to what I tell you, because I didn't trust anybody.
When were you able to make that pivot from not being able to trust anybody to, it seems like you became a pretty trustworthy person when it comes to people?
Yeah, I would say probably my wife has done the best job of getting me to trust people. And I actually shifted almost in the other direction. And my partners at many of the firms said, you're really naive. And I'm not naive. I trust people to the point that I let them know that I trust them. And if they do something wrong, I find out about them. One of the problems is if you don't trust people, then they hide everything. And I'm running a company, you got to get people that are really going to open up to you. And that's important. I kind of shifted. I was pretty angry until I was in my, I guess somewhere right after Lehman Brothers. I was in my 40s before I really I had some of the wrong goals. I wanted to make a lot of money because I was very poor. I was aggressive and hardworking and so forth. And I pivoted sort of in my mid 40s and started to say, hey, this is not the way you can't be that kind of person. You can't be that serious about, earning a living and so on and so forth. So I got less tough and more easygoing and so forth. And then I got a chance to run a company by myself, and it really paid off in having that kind of leadership capability. And I must say, I did trust. You're right. I trusted people completely, and and it worked out for me. I mean, a lot of people it doesn't work out for. People will cheat you and so forth and so on. But I find that's the best thing you can do is to have someone, do something wrong because they think you're too innocent or too naive, and then you catch them, and then that's a person you can't trust.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of my father, who trusted everybody, and a lot of times, he got taken advantage of quite a bit, and but he just kept going on and trusting. And I like to call it the trust tax, where it's much better to go that way about life, and then learning, if those people do let you down, get them out of your life. Maybe learn how to
exactly
with the character.
It's a message you send if you trust someone. You can actually take an untrustworthy person and make them trustful by sending a message to them But you're right. And by the way, just to be practical, it's a lot easier to trust people than not to trust them. It really is. And I go along with your father. I found that if someone will do me in, I'd let them do me in early. And the way they do you in early is if you really give them, you let them know that you can be cheated.
Right. But before you got to Lehman Brothers and Wall Street and everything, you did have a great experience learning from the Navy, right?
Navy. I just, if I was the president of the United States, I'd put uniform military service back in a minute. Age 20, as an officer was another thing. But you spend 4 years as a midshipman. I scrubbed decks and lived in a rack, 6 racks high. I was on USS Iowa for the summer. I went to Little Creek and did Marine training for 3 weeks. I trained as a Navy pilot down in Corpus Christi, and all these kind of, I crossed the equator and came a shellback. And so, great experience. Then, but at age 22, arriving in Okinawa and being introduced to your division, it was 150, 200 eyeballs looking at you, say, who is this 22-year-old boy? And the 55-year-old warrant officer came and said, Mr. Hajim, you got 6 months. And, and I learned that ship top to bottom.
So how were you able to connect with them? Because that's something, Ed, that a lot of our listeners and the people we work with struggle with. Somebody gets promoted into a leadership role. They have a team with a lot more experience, and people look at them like, why should I listen to this guy or that woman? I mean, I was doing sales, or I was leading in the accounting department before this person even got out of college.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I had to prove to him. And it was, there was no other way to prove to them except to try to attempt to understand, never do better than, you can't do better than their job, to understand, just standing over the chief electrician or the chief carpenter while he's doing his job and asking him questions, reasonable questions. But, they saw me at night studying the books. And also I got qualified for everything. I mean, and you're also interested in people. I'll tell you stories you won't believe. I mean, my quartermaster came to me one day and said, my father's younger than I am. Can you help me out? And I said, I understand biology. That doesn't work. She said, you don't understand. My mother got divorced and she married a seaman. And I go home every night and take him out of a bar and, bring him home. And so I spent some time counseling him. And he basically spread the word that this this officer is really interested in me. And also I spent this is one of the leadership principles so important, is that the personal experience that a person has is so much more important than the work experience as far as they're concerned. So if anything happens, to like this particular kid had a real problem, or anything else that went on, and even today, I run the golf course. I'm the president or the lead director of our golf course.
Which is a great story that I would appreciate if you could tell as well about how you came to this golf course.
Well, let's spin them into anyway. In the military, you learn discipline. You learn to be a role model. Mm-hmm. You learn that you can never get anything done without a committed and motivated team. And it's a team. Every time you could lose the war without that team. And so I find that and you also, whatever that has to be done, you've got to learn it. I mean, sure, I was an engineer, but I didn't understand how an old C2 shelled engine room worked. I had to go through there, and I went through every pump, every pipe to find out what it was like. And anything came up with. And like in my era, we had the ABC business. I became the ABC officer, atomic, biological, and chemical warfare. That was all brand new. I had to go back to school to do that. And so it taught you, no matter what had to be done, you had to go and do it, even though it was new or old, no matter what it was. But
what was the biggest difference in between military leadership and leading companies in the corporate world? In
military, you had rules. You didn't think outside the box. Very rarely. I mean, the big strategic decisions, which beach to land on and what to decoy. But every day, your job was just to follow the rules very, very definitely. And I mean, make sure the portholes, if you hold your hand up, you can't see any light out of them. And you had to read the rules exactly what people had, because the guy up or above you, came to you and said, "Did you follow those rules?" And in business, I found, thinking outside the box was your saving grace. In fact, my magic 2 words for my companies is "what's next." I don't want to know anything about yesterday's problems. I want to know what we're going to do next. And thinking outside the box and thinking, how to get ahead is more important. But you don't do that in the military. That's not your job, unless you're way up at the top. And even there, there's a lot of rules to be followed, a lot of politics and so on. But in a company, you really want people who are imaginative, creative, they're thinking differently. And you can't have a bunch of people thinking differently when you're landing the troops on the beach.
So how do you get your organization? How do you develop a culture in the business world? People are being creative. They're thinking out of the box. Everybody's generating ideas, as a team.
Well, it's harder on Zoom. I think that's one of the negatives in Zoom, because what you really want to do is put bodies together. I believe in retreats. I believe in session, in brainstorming sessions. I think that's kind of important. But I also believe in what I call periodicity, that every year you've got a plan to do something, whatever you're doing. I mean, I just finished doing a new pergola at the golf course, a new women's locker room, I said to Tommy this morning, I said, what are we going to do next year? And so that you get that focus. And if you're a leader, you call people and say, we're on a lily pad right now, and everybody's coming for this lily pad. Get too many people on a lily pad, it sinks. We got to move to the next, jump to the next lily pad. We got to keep moving. It depends upon the size of the company too. I mean, but in most companies, it's the idea of continuing to do what's new and get everybody mentally toward that, and also celebrate and congratulate. On a regular basis, if somebody comes up with an idea that's great, celebrate it and congratulate that person. And take he and his wife, go send his wife and he to dinner and that kind of thing. But the most important thing is that we'll go back to that personal thing. Make sure everybody recognizes that each one of the people who work for you are human beings and have personal problems. Like this morning, our teaching pro wife had trouble breathing, and he was worried about going home. The manager sent him home, and I just sent him an email. I said, stay home. Do not come back until she's out of the ICU and you're really comfortable with everything like that. That's important. I mean, one of my lucky experiences on this is that one of the kids on our stock exchange floor, he was a kid I maybe met him once. He was giving his kidney to his brother. And I called him the morning before he went to the hospital. I said, that's one of the greatest things I've ever heard of. Well, when he came back, he told everybody about that. And I didn't mean to do it that way, but it was just something that people got the word that I was interested. I had a woman who would come in on a regular basis, a couple times a week, and give me births, deaths, problems. She was in charge of the understanding what was underneath the carpet, and we always celebrated anybody that had birth or anybody who got married. We always sent them something, and that's been a constant thing. That's what there's 4 things that I look at in a company: culture, strategy, people, and numbers. And unfortunately, it's in that order. Culture can eat strategy, can be more important. If you write the culture, you can almost get over anything. But then if you get good culture, then you have to have a decent strategy, and you do that with people. And I must say, I had a terrific weakness for numbers. And early in my life, one of my partners said, Ed, you got to get somebody with the numbers. And the 6'5" Dartmouth graduate who spent 35 years with me, love the numbers, love talking to the government and people, the SEC and the NASD and so forth. That's the idea of what I call my P. Find someone who can do things that you can't do. Find things that people do better than you can do. And then also find people that do things you do really well that you don't want to do. And this guy did all those things. So, I say surround yourself with those kind of people and you're going to be a very happy person. Also, but you got to give them credit.
Yeah, well, let me just rewind for a second. One thing I think you talked about giving people credit, giving them gratitude. 2 of the best leaders I've ever interviewed on this show. One was Doug Conant. I don't know if you did a leverage with Nabisco and Campbell.
Yeah.
Campbell's. He wrote 10,000 letters to his employees. Then the other guy, Tom Mendoza, was a president and chairman of the board at NetApp. Would call 5 people a day, and he said that those families would just light up. They could be all over the world, and the chairman or the president called and just said, thank you for what you did. It just shows you, regardless of the size of your organization, if you care about your people, they feel like they belong and they have purpose, they will become that motivated workforce. And with everything you just said, Ed, is, which I know is your third principle, and your third P, and I want to talk about your book, The 4 Ps, and what you're doing there, is through partners, right? I mean, the best leaders, you got to surround yourself with great people. And on here you said deflect the credit, give it to them, give them the ideas.
I early on, I decided, that basically, that this cliche, you can accomplish almost anything. You don't care who gets the credit. But I took that a step further, started deflecting credit. No time when anyone said to me, Ed, you've done a great job. I said, no. Okay. But Mary Sue and Jose, they're really, what happens, you get a trifecta. You feel good. Person who talked to you felt good. When Mary Jo and Jose find out, they feel good. It spreads. Constantly deflect credit. I give you 2 examples, which when I was the chairman, president, alumni associate at Harvard Business School, they were going to do a day for me as I was finishing up my term, and I basically created a video for the associate dean of the school because she really did the job. Christine Fairchild is fantastic. I created a video with her at the where they keep splitting the person, she used to do so many different things. I put her face on there and did a video when it was supposed to be my day. And one woman came up to me and she said, I've never seen anything so fantastic. Never seen a graciousness that has exceeded what you did today. And then when I finished up as the chairman of the University of Rochester, I gave everybody a book called This Is the Moment, which I can talk about if you want. But more importantly, I found a crystal. A guy had a crystal, and it said on it, University of Rochester, thank you, Ed. And I said, this is a thank you can't destroy, because I owe you a thank you beyond any destruction. So it was, and people have it on the desk. I still have it over here. So, but keep thinking about those kinds of things, and the guy who runs our club he's that way. I mean, he constantly, giving things away, employee of the month, MVPs, he calls them, and that's what you want. You want to communicate that culture that we really care about you. I mean, really physically, it's an important thing.
And on one side, yes, you want to deflect and give the credit to people. On the other side, if things don't go well, the leader's got to be out in front and bear the brunt of the blame if things don't go well, right? You can't just push the blame out on somebody. And I know you talk a lot about it, and I'm a huge believer on this, is that victim mentality and pushing out blame on others that's just not the way to go.
No, you're right. My boss at Lehman Brothers wrecked the company because of that. He blamed people. Go Glucksman, it's a legend. He destroyed the company because he would never take the blame. And it was his fault. He basically overtraded the firm. You're absolutely right. Take the blame. And by the way, when you take that blame, you get so much credit for taking it. You do it a couple of times. And no, I always say early failure is a gift. Late failure is not too good. I mean, that you got to be careful of that. But I think early failure is a gift. And I find that, people.
Can you give me an example of that?
Oh, when I started my own company, I spun myself off from capital research and tried to do everything. They were going to sell a fund and I was going to run it and manage the company. I was going along gangbusters. I was one of the best funds in America. Then they said, we're not going to sell it anymore. And I said, okay, I can do that. At age 32, I could do anything. So I started marketing as well as managing the fund, as well as managing people. And it wasn't so much that I couldn't do it, as I started to develop talents which were contrary to these other talents. Being a great salesman is not a great people person, and then basically a lousy portfolio manager. And I missed the 1972 market, and had to sell the company back to them. It was really terrible because it's called the Growth Fund of America, which ended up being one of the largest funds in the world.
Huge.
But they took it over. Yeah, I founded that.
You started it?
I started it. Yeah, it was a little company in New Jersey was going bankrupt, and I bought it for $50,000. I started.
What would you have done differently?
What, in the world, my life? You mean?
No, in that situation.
Oh, I should have basically hired a marketing person, and given that away because I was doing the other two things very well. Company's a happy company, and portfolio management we were doing really well. But I took my eye off the ball because I went out. Also, I couldn't do retail. They were selling retail. I went institutional. I ended up with 5 or 6 institutions who required 4 meetings a year. So I was flying to Toledo and to Chicago, and and there's also pressure. You sit down in a room with these beady-eyed guys and try to make presentations, and then get back on the plane and go back to the office. You only have 2 hours of creative capability a day. I call it creative energy, and you use it up marketing. And you use it up wrongly because marketing is pastel. Portfolio manager is black and white, and that's oversimplification. But you get really bad habits because in marketing you keep going back to get to the order. Portfolio management, if it's bad, sell it, go on. So, and also with people, you don't have the same kind of patience you had when you're out there marketing. So it's I learned that was a wonderful learning experience for me. Learning you couldn't do everything. You had to surround yourself with people again who could do the other things. And, the rest of my life, I did that. Every time I needed something, I put somebody in there to do it that I couldn't do it and do only those things which I really liked doing. And that was a real learning experience. But early failures, I want to get back to that victim thing. One of I have 3 mantras that I give people in my book. Anything is possible. I can prove that. I'm living proof of that. Education is the solution to everything. And I believe young people, almost even like you, some of the people later on in life will have to go back to school full time. Things change so much. I mean, what's going on in AI and things like that, you may have to go back to school to, if you're doing something different. And the third thing is never be a victim, because use that energy. That energy you use as a victim, use it for what's next. That's hard enough. And I can prove that time and again. When I failed with this company, I had to sell it back to the company. I could have caused a lot of problems. I could have sold to somebody else. I just said, what's next? And I went on. I got a job on Wall Street and went on about my business. Lehman Brothers are the opposite. That was my fault. Lehman Brothers wasn't my fault. They just pushed me out, but I could afford them because I was the chairman of 6 outside boards, and I could have taken the company out. Could have gone to lawyers and so forth, and I got my dream job, which was to run a small investment bank, and I did that. So,
I love what you say that put your energy somewhere else, right? Put your energy somewhere else.
Don't hate people. Don't hate situations. No. Don't give
how do you
blame.
Help? But that's easy for guys like me and you because that's kind of like in our DNA, where I just get over things and you learn and I don't take blame. I'd rather just blame myself, whatever. But how do you help somebody with a victim mentality? Can you help individuals, either somebody you're mentoring or somebody that works for you or a loved one who has that mentality? Is there anything you can do to shift that?
To go back to the 4 Ps a little bit, but what else do you want to do? And I've done this with people we had to fire. I fired very few people. In fact, never only fired 2 people in 25 years on the spot. And usually when a person wasn't working out, I would go in and go through the what's next. What do you really want to do? Think about other things that'll make you happy. And recognizing, and I say it out loud, it never does you any good to hate anybody or dislike a situation or get revenge. It never does you any good. And it's hugely energy. It's a huge energy utilization, And by the way, finding out what's next it requires an enormous amount of energy as well. But if you get it to someone and the person believes that you're trying to help them, although some people are impossible, none of these things work for everybody. I find that that's focusing on and bringing, what else can you do? What else have you done? And I sometimes go back to old resumes and look what they did in college and high school or first jobs, and find out whether there's likes and dislikes. Like this entrepreneurial thing. The guy who's 40 years old wants to be an entrepreneur. If you didn't have a lemonade stand and you didn't sell books for somebody, and don't do when you're 40 years old, you don't understand it. So this is the whole process. But I think that you hit upon something. And also one of the problems you have to get over as a manager is that you can't save everybody. There are certain people that you just have to say, I can't spend that much time, on energy on you. And you get that very quickly with a person. If they respond to, thinking about what else they want to do, what other things they can do. And if they get over the idea that, so-and-so doesn't like them. And, so-and-so is the manager, and that he's a package. And, if you don't get along with him, he's still the boss. All right. You do that with division heads. I can't do that. I can move you someplace else in the company, maybe, but that may not be a good idea either. Let's find something else. But it's not easy. That's one of the more difficult things that you have to deal with. And you can't, and by the way, as a leader, you can't get that to anybody else. Your people can do it. If they get people who can do it. Also,
well, one thing you can do though is you got to lead by example. So if you model the behavior and you're not acting as a victim and passing blame and everything, that's at least something that people can model on. But you got all this wealth of experience and everything you've done, and you've turned it into a book. The Island of 4 Ps, which is a fable, and we've already kind of gone through some of these. One question I have about the book is, what made you decide to write it in a fable format?
If you go back in history, fables are a way of trapping you into doing your own thinking. It's really a non-teachy, non-preachy structure. And also, when you read a fable, you automatically think about yourself. You put yourself in that experience. And, Aesop's fables, the Bible, I mean, these are all fables. And they really communicate, who my cheese? And it basically, as I say, traps you in your own thinking. And I thought that, Who My Cheese sold 20 million copies. And I thought that'd be kind of cool. And I wanted to communicate an idea. I found out that ideas are more absorbable in a fable than when you write and my third book is going to be one of these lessons learned on road less travel. It's going to be one, teachy one, because I think I want
when to come out.
My ghostwriter just fell off his bicycle, but it's pretty well written. It took me 10 years. I wrote 3 manuscripts, and the third manuscript's going to come out. I'd like to do 20 chapters, 25 chapters, these 6 pages, each a lesson, like early failure is a gift, lay it out. Education is a solution, lay it out. Recognize context is important. I have about 25 different principles that I can give examples of each one, but I think that the fable to me was a really kind of a humorous, and also I thought the fable would also appeal to many different age levels. And what's interesting is one of the groups that I'm working with is thinking about making a musical out of it, and another group is thinking about possibly making a video game. It'll be the first video game where nobody gets shot. So I may be right, but look back at you look back at your fables. I mean, I just finished the Celestine Prophecies. I missed that one, and he struggled for many years and finally sold about 12 million copies. The idea that you meet the next person and it takes you in a new direction, and a subtle experience. And so my fable is, and by the way, the gal who did the audio, she took out the lesson plans at the end of each chapter and made it just one story. So it just flows through very, very nicely. So I wanted to write a fable because I thought that it's an easy way of absorbing ideas and communicating ideas. But I think what people get out of fables, which they don't recognize, is it really traps them. They do their own thinking. They follow with this character through this fantasy land themselves, and they start asking themselves the same questions. Whereas if you have somebody say, do this, do that, it doesn't go as well, I don't think.
No, I mean,
and there's also many to-do books, and there are very few fables.
Yeah, and first of all, your book is about 2.5, 3 hours worth read or listen to, which is very consumable and easy. And And absolutely, there's too many, here's how-to books that are boring. And, obviously the first P is passion. And one thing I've heard you talk about, which I agree, is it's okay for your passions to change over time. Like when I was a little kid, it was cartoons, and maybe for a while it was music and girls, and then now it's family, right? So you go through that succession in your life, and you find what your passions are and go from there.
No, that you're. I always tell that you're just like when I was in high school, it was baseball, basketball, math, science, and girls. That was it, and girls may have been more important than anything else. Yeah. College, that morphed. Math and science morphed first into physics, then engineering. Okay, baseball and basketball. After my freshman year, I realized I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. That morphed into extracurricular activities. And there I found my enthusiasm. Girls stayed in place. And, and then after engineering, I went to business school. My interest morphed into finance. And now, I give you one principle I had when I was on Wall Street, which was, was very weak. It's a very weakness for me because I was not a celebrity. I had my mantra was to live happy was to live hidden. No press, no television, no external. Work on the company because when it was a small company, I had to do the job. Okay. So I no social media, nothing. Now that I'm selling ideas, I'm talking to guys like you and I'm out in the open. My daughter is scared to death that some woman will come up and what I did when I was 16 years old or something. I told her most of the skeletons in my closet are dead, so she doesn't have to worry anymore. But
she's got to get you on a TED Talk.
What?
Your daughter works there. Where's your TED Talk?
Well, she's just quit TED Talk. So no,
okay,
that's her domain.
Forget it then.
I should have done a TED Talk, but that's her domain. And you don't want to crowd your kids. That's another problem. And if you're really successful, it's very difficult on your kids. It really is. And it's so many of my friends who are very successful have difficult kids. I mean, suicides and everything. It was just horrible.
Yeah, no, I've seen it. I mean, growing up in a fortunate family that I came from, a lot of my dad's friends, kids didn't turn out too well.
No. Let me give you a stupid statement. There's no such thing as a happy rich grandchild. No, it's true. If you earn your money to buy the bicycle, you love the bicycle. If you're given a bicycle,
But we talked about that a little bit. And I think that I was wanting to share one example. So we talked about this beforehand, which is true. How do you manufacture uncomfortableness for your kids if they grow up in an entitled, potentially entitled lifestyle?
Camp is very important. Send them this Kuwaitan that my kids go to, live in a tent. Live in a tent. They get up every morning early and they basically salute the flag and eat in the dining room on wooden chairs. Then go out and carry their canoes to the lake. And they spend, every year they spend a longer period in the boondocks, for 7 days. Now, my 15-year-old is going to spend, I guess, like 2 weeks in the boondocks. And that's going to be great. Outward Bound is wonderful. Knowles is even better. Now, my grandson, took the Knowles trip in Alaska, spent 30 days in the rain. What a wonderful experience. I mean, the camaraderie between all those people in the rain was just terrific. So those but also work experiences. Go out and get a job someplace. Where you're not known. You're not the boss's son. Get a job. Also, every summer I would recommend to after you worked, or you have a camp experience, is to travel someplace. Get a backpack and go to Europe or Chile or some other damn place. And those are the kinds of things you have. Now, they're a little phony. Living in an orphanage is easier. You automatically get the resilience, thrown in. But, if you have these people, and the Boy Scouts used to do this. And the Boy Scouts are gone now, which is kind of sad. There were things like that. You became a fine family. If you became an Eagle Scout, you really did things, But they don't do that anymore. Also, the other problem is religion. You used to have religion that was a big deal. Now you go to church or synagogue or mosque. Old people, the only people there are old people. But it's moving back. I just read a study the other day that actually men are moving back to religion, which is going to be healthy. I think, religion has a whole other subject. That's another podcast. But no, I think that you have to make your kids work every summer. Never waste the summer. It's so important because that's experiential and that's worth as much as any schooling that one could have. You learn something. You can also find a friend who will take in your wealthy son and work him. Somebody who will has a job that they, especially if somebody has a big job. In other words, I hitchhiked up to the St. Lawrence Seaway when they're building it, and I talked my way into a job there because I thought that I wanted to work on big projects. And, that was a great experience. And I learned that I love the job. I mean, pouring concrete, 200 feet down and so forth, blasting crews and so forth. But I realized those people who work there live in trailers for 10 years, and I didn't want to live in a trailer. So that's one of the things, that's why my course, I want people to take these monikers, engineer. What does that mean? I had a job to work in a plant, or I could have been, in plastics 5 years before Dustin Hoffman. That's what I did do. Or on Wall Street, an analyst versus investment banker. That's in my book. When I got out, I could have been an investment banker, which has been those days, been 4 to 8 years in servitude. And an analyst, in 3 months, you're out on the road calling on companies. These guys paid $6,000 a year. As an analyst, you made $11,000 a year. Yet the guy that I talked to at the investment banking firm said, you don't want to be a gopher. You want to be an eagle. An eagle spends his time in his dungeon following somebody around, and the gopher flies to San Francisco and talks to some management. So, that's why what do you do Monday morning physically? I'm wandering off again. Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Yeah.
My question for you is, as I'm listening, what keeps a guy like you who's had so much success so pumped up still these days?
Oh, I'm just. There may be some genealogical stuff. I'm just curious. When you like doing things with people, and like I run the golf course. I founded the golf course, and that's a wonderful story.
Can you just please tell that story? I mean, I've already asked twice.
Nantucket is a fairly successful guy in the late '80s, yeah. And I got my friends said, "You got to join this, Jocko. You got to join this golf club." I said, "Okay." So we built a house and got on the list. And 5 years later, I said to the president, who was a friend of mine from Greenwich, says, "Where am I?" He said, "Well, I can't tell you." I said, "What do you mean you can't tell me?" He said, "You're 105." I said, 105? I was 105 5 years ago. So he said, "You're probably never going to get in." And I can tell you why I didn't, but that's bloody. So I went home and told my wife, "We got to move out of here." And she said, "You built a golf course in Vail. Why don't you build one here?" So I went out and found a piece of land, 300 acres, and called the guy from Vail. He showed up and so forth. And so, 25 years later, I made a speech at the member term. And I said, first thing I want to thank is the directors of Sankey Head for rejecting me. Because I became, one of the great things in life is after 9 holes, you walk up to the snack bar, and the gal says, "What do you like?" And I said, "I have muscle milk." She says, "What's your number?" Number 1.
Number 1. Just imagine if you had a victim mentality, right?
We have a golf course, and now took the golf course, which, it was a pariah when we first arrived at the island because all these rich guys the rich gals doing this thing against on the island. We now have become the largest charity on the island. We support 90 charities. We have 90 kids in school. We have a gala every year. Last year we raised almost $7 million, on one night. I mean, that's totally
on one night
for a club. We have an $18 million endowment. We've raised about $50 million over the 25-year period, and we give these 20 scholarships out a year. And this year, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. The mothers came over and hugged me. They said, "You changed my child's life." And
you've given out over 300 scholarships, I believe, right?
Me personally, I have scholarship programs in about 10 in different institutions because it changed my life. And, you give, if a kid can get to 17, 18, all he needs is a little bit of money to get him over the hump. You do that, you really change lives. It's really fun. It's a great thing. And I've done it at Rochester, at Harvard, and then wherever my kids went to school, we established a scholarship. And I've done a poor job of I've kept up with some of the young people, but there's a girlfriend of mine who gives one scholarship, and she really keeps track of these kids, and it's been great for her. She travels she has about 20 of them now over a 20-year period. But I have probably 300 or so. And
I probably know the answer to this question, but what does it make you feel like to give this way and see the impact that it has?
It's a satisfaction like no other. Give me my 4 realms of life, which you didn't discuss: self, family, work, and what I call community, which is giving back. And it's not a balance; it's a harmony between those 4 things. And you concentrate on the reason there's no balance is because, by definition, to be successful in any one of them, you have to focus. And once you focus on one, you neglect the other. But someplace in your life, you work on community, giving back, and it is by far the greatest satisfaction. There is no greater satisfaction. One of my famous scholarship students, Sarah Walters, she's 5 foot high. She's a optical engineering PhD now, plays the violin, concert pianist, concert violinist, Irish dance team. And she stood up at a ceremony and said, if it wasn't for you, Mr. Hajim, I wouldn't be here. Well, whatever I've done in my life, it was paid for everything. And of course, you got a bunch of these kids out there that say, thank you very much for doing it. And in Nantucket, it is wonderful. These high school kids, my manager does a great job of going through it. They start when they're freshman year competing for these scholarships. We give 2 full-time academic scholarships and 8 other academic scholarships. And now we started 7-8 years ago on what they used to call vocational. I've changed the word professional: nurses, marine engineers, carpenters, plumbers, welders, and so forth. Because I went to the high school and I said, what do you think of our program? He said, it's great, but half the kids here don't go to college. So we started that program. And I wrote an article, which nobody printed 3 years ago, about, everybody's talking about it now. We really want to produce more vocational people because they'll have jobs. AI may replace the young lawyer, but he's not going to replace the HVAC guy or the plumber or the carpenter. And those guys make good money and they have a good time. And if you're passionate about that, God bless. We had one young man that loves food, and he wanted to go to Johnson Wells. It cost $60,000 a year to go to Johnson Wells. We gave him a scholarship. No, mix me food. It's basically what I'm on a crusade right now because I get satisfaction. I'm selfish. Makes me feel great, and it's so inexpensive. Down in Key Largo, we're working with the community college down there. Kids, for $6,000 to $10,000 a year, you can get a kid go from high school to a profession, and it's ridiculous. The president of Keys Community College has now got a program. 2 of us are sponsoring it, and he's moving these kids from high school into these professions: a carpenter, plumber, electrician, HVAC person. It's just wonderful. Or nurse, nurses are in short supply. So no, it's what you do at the end of your life. If you do it earlier, it's fine too. But when you're successful and you live as long as we live, which is good. This is something you can really do and get away with it. I can't run I would love to run a company. That's why I like running the golf course, because it's kind of like a company, but I've got a full-time manager. But you can't do it anymore because running a company requires you to be there early in the morning and at 6 o'clock at night. When I used to walk around, that's when you learn everything. And it's 24/7 if you're running a company. So I can't do that anymore, but you can start these kinds of things where other people take the lead roles. In other words, I don't pick the people who get the scholarships. I just give the money and get the satisfaction out of it.
Well, Ed, you're an incredible human being.
You
are. It's okay, but you are. And I just want to kind of recap. We started off talking about the question that everybody should be asking themselves. Who you are, who you want to be, why. We talked about growing up in orphanages and how you made it through that and what you learned, your 3 gifts from the Navy and that incredible experience about how you were able to connect with and lead people who were more than twice your age back then. What you learned on Wall Street, what you're doing now, turning disadvantage into advantage. I love what you talked about, these kids who are 17 years old who've had struggles, just giving them a little money. I mean, they're already ahead. They know what resilience is. They know what perseverance is.
Exactly. Yeah.
In everything.
They need a little bit of money. That's all they need. They'll get over the top. That's it. Yeah.
Giving them a shot. I mean, that's so amazing.
The thing's changing lives. I mean, kindergarten is over. That's a very important, but early. But that's that nexus right there, 17, 18, 19, where for example, one of the high school kids are going to the school. There's a vocational school in Boston. We found out about it. Kids are going from Nantucket High School to them without scholarships. We're going to dig those kids up and give them scholarships because I really believe for $6,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 to take a kid and these parents don't have money. They don't have it. They can't send the kid to school, so we can do that. And you should see it. What happened basically when you first formed the club, you couldn't go downtown with this logo on your shirt. Now you go down there, they hug you because their kid was sent to college. And so forth. Also, some of the charities here, food banks, and there's a woman who runs something called the House. She feeds kids every night, and we bought her a bus so she could take the kids back to their houses at night. So it's really wonderful.
And one of the themes through all of this, whether it's through scholarships or through employees, whatever, is helping people understand that there's greatness inside of them that maybe they don't see. And I think that's so important. So for all you coaches out there and you parents and you managers, is helping people unlock or see that greatness in them that maybe that they don't even know they have exist. So I got one final question for you. And I know this is the last words in your book, Ed. What's next?
Well, what's next for me is I have the syllabus, and I have this presumption that I'm going to create a dimension for college education, a new dimension for college education, where the school's responsible not only to making a living, but having you make a life. So you graduate with a diploma and a life design written in pencil, so you can erase it and change it and so forth. But during that 4-year period, you've run through some tests because you've asked yourself the key questions. That's what's next for me. Plus, and I always do too many different things at the same time. I really want to keep boosting this, what used to be called vocational education. Say you don't have to go to college. That's what my article said. You have to basically find out what you want to do and find out how to do that. And that there are so many things you can do that you don't have to spend 4 years at a university. You can spend 2 years doing something and then 2 years doing something else and so forth. And I think that's the other, crusade that I have. I also, I do too much. I want to write a piece, which we started. We wrote a piece already on the golf club. Any place where a club is a fairly large part of a community. You can't do it in New York City. A large part of the community. Make sure you do something charitable, because it will change the whole culture of your membership. It will. Our members are so happy that, because they're involved in the community now. And, we put out a book every year and show all the charities we give money to and so forth. And what's nice about some of the members told me, every charity bothers me on down. I say, I gave it to the club. The club, go to the club. And so that's.
But Ed, that you could make a club a differentiator by doing that.
It becomes an institution. You change it from a club to an institution. If you're in No Place, Arkansas, and you're in a community of 30 or 40,000 people, and you're the only club in town, and you have a gala once a year, and you start giving money to charities. That's what I want. I'd like to do that. And there's a fellow here that writes really well, and we've been coordinating. I think that's something I'd like to. So I've got what's next. I always have a bunch of stuff out there. I'm keep going. I want a third book too, because the Hajim trilogy.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Hey, the world needs more guys like you, Ed. Well, I mean it. Where can our listeners connect with you at?
I having hidden myself for all those years, I now have a website, which is quite robust. And you can follow me on Instagram. I haven't gone on TikTok. I've said no to that. You can follow me.
Come on, you got to get on TikTok.
What? I don't know why. It just haven't. It just has when the National Enquirer wanted to do an article.
What do your kids and grandkids think about? Like, for instance, I was always kind of a behind the scenes guy myself, never a big time guy like you. But now my wife's like, you're like an undercover celebrity with all your LinkedIn and your Instagram and all your posting. And my daughter my little 7-year-old daughter gets a kick out of me. What do your kids think about seeing you on TikTok and Instagram and out there? They probably love it.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's my oldest. He's an underwater photographer, and he's got 22,000 followers. My daughter has hers is private. And my son has he's an architect, so they get a kick out of it. Dad, you never stop, and then they laugh.
You never stop.
And we get together at least once a year as a whole family, and this is important too, and communicate with the kids. But we talk to the kids every week. My wife is very, very involved.
So they connect with you. They can check out your website, maybe connect with you on Instagram, and obviously buy your 2 books.
Oh, please.
We're not going to get it. I'm not going to tell the story. I know what happened to your mom. I'm not going to tell that story.
Okay.
But you got to go buy Ed's book to figure it out, because it's an incredible story.
Damon, this has been terrific. I think
it's been awesome. Dad, it's been awesome. And so listeners, do me a favor. If you know somebody who can really get value out of trying to figure out what is their passion, what do they need to do, or where do they want to go out and send them this episode with Ed. They're gonna love it. Send it to your friends. Send it to other people who are leading people. And until next time, everybody, do me a favor. Stay curious. Keep learning. Have a great time. See ya.
How do we change people's behavior? How do we build a mindset of transformation, a mindset of continuous improvement in people. I would always encourage leaders to